We're going to be talking about link functions in a GLM. For something to qualify as a link function, it needs to satisfy two constraints, but before we get to that, quickly want to summarize what a link function is. So initially we have our linear regression, and that's just saying that the summation of our x's times their coefficients, beta. Taking that, we get our predictor for y, or our expected value of y, which we denote mu. A GLM, one of the things it's trying to do is deal with that the relationship between our x's and our mu is a bit more complicated. So we can deal with nonlinearities, we can deal with changes in the domain of our expected value. It might, for example, binomial, we don't want it to be able to range negative infinity to positive infinity, and a few other things. So that's what our link function is, connecting our linear predictor to mu, or our expected value of y, that we're considering. For something to be a link function, then, we need it to be strictly monotonic. So that is, we want a given linear predictor value, so that x beta, for a given value of that, we want it to correspond to a single y and vice versa. So we want things to be invertible, so our g of y needs to be strictly monotonic. That can be increasing or decreasing, and also I think in the textbook it just says monotonic, but I think it needs to be strictly monotonic. I might be adding an additional constraint there, but I think it needs to be. Secondly, it needs to be differentiable. Again, I'm not 100% sure why. My inclination is to say that for GLMs you need to be able to perform gradient descent to estimate your beta, and in order to perform gradient descent you need to be able to differentiate. So that's my guess. I've been searching and haven't been able to find an explicit saying why it needs to be differentiable. That's my guess. Feel free to comment below if you know that there's a different reason for this constraint. But just to summarize, for something to be a link function, it needs to be both monotonic and differentiable. So with that, that's really the main legwork. Jumping into the actual problem itself isn't too complicated once you know that part. So for our first function of interest, it is not an acceptable answer, and that's because it's not monotonic. So obviously if you plot it, you can see it decreases and then it increases. With the changes to the testing where we now have Excel, this is actually a viable way of doing the solution. So honestly, I would probably just go in Excel, type this formula, drag and drop, and get essentially, I don't know if you can plot in that or not, but you could see all the values and see it decreases and then it increases. The old school way, or maybe the more correct way to do it, is to actually differentiate, which answers that second part. We can take the derivative, and then when you do that you can solve for 0 and then find a solution. And so we know that when we take this derivative, solve for 0, get 4.5. We know that at 4.5 there's either a local minimum or a maximum or inflection point. We could confirm that it's a minimum or a maximum then by taking the second derivative and seeing if it's positive or negative. And we don't really care which one it is. We just know that that there is a local minimum or maximum, therefore it is monotonic. Or sorry, it is not monotonic. And since it's not monotonic, it can't be a link function. Going to our second function, it actually is a potential link function, and that's because it meets both of these criteria. So monotonic, it's just 4 minus 4y, it's strictly decreasing. And then also it's differentiable, so if we took the derivative, we just get a constant value of -4, and have that written out here. And then finally we have the absolute value. This fails both constraints. So first off, it is not monotonic, so quite clearly it is decreasing and then increasing. And then it is also not differentiable, and that happens at the value of 0. So it's differentiable everywhere except for at 0. Something else I should say, I believe that these constraints only apply to the domain of interest. So if we scroll back up to the question, we see that our domain is y going from negative infinity to positive infinity. However, if the domain was just from 1 to 2 or something weird like that, I think you could use the absolute value of y. I don't know why you would say absolute value of y if you're only considering that range, but I believe these constraints only apply to the actual domain that you're working with. But with that said, to summarize, we found that this is not monotonic, and then this is neither monotonic or differentiable within the domain, and therefore the only acceptable answer is 2, and so B is our final answer. Thanks for watching.